SEP FanFic Readings presents Thanks to the Photographs by Unstable Hufflepuff. Chapter 13. Gilderoy Lockhart Bad. Being woken up by Veronica Smith at 8 in the morning after a night of heavy drinking was unpleasant, to say the least. Learning that she'd been sent to fetch her because Minerva McGonagall had requested Hermione's presence in her office only added to the effect. "Come on, Hermione, up you get," Veronica said breathlessly, continuing to jump up and down on the bed as Hermione rolled over, burying her face in her pillow. No, don't you dare go back to sleep. I swear to Merlin, I'll jump on you. Don't think I won't." Hermione let out a muffled groan before turning back over and sitting up, massaging her temples. "Why the hell would she want to speak to me this early?" she asked miserably. "No fucking clue," said Veronica, still bouncing. "But she was making that sour lemon face, so it can't be good. You know, the one where she narrows her eyes and purses her lips?" "I'm very familiar, yes." Veronica snickered, finally leaping off the bed. She spun around with a surprising amount of elegance to beam at Hermione. "Well, you're awake, so I've done my job," she said brightly. With a little curtsy, she spun back around and headed for the door. Before leaving, however, she sent Hermione a wink over her shoulder. "By the way, congratulations! You're officially my new idol." Hermione absolutely did not like the sound of that. She immediately racked her brain for what she could have possibly done in the last 24 hours in order to achieve Veronica's admiration. She came up with far too many answers. Had Rita Skeeter spied on her in Hogsmeade? Had it gotten out that she punched Ron? That Draco hexed him? Oh God, Draco. She wondered, as she hurriedly dressed and fixed her hair, what other people did while under the influence, because surely no sane person would spontaneously decide to shag one of their closest friends in a fucking greenhouse. She grimaced as she cleaned residual dirt off the backs of her thighs. Hermione was heavy with dread by the time she reached the headmistress's office 20 minutes later. After giving the password, Fox, to the stone gargoyle on guard, she started up the winding steps to the door, wiping her suddenly very sweaty palms on her skirt. The fact that Draco was already there and sitting opposite Minerva did nothing to soothe her nerves. She knows about the fucking greenhouse, Hermione thought in complete and utter terror as she shakily took the seat next to him. This is where we get fired. She glanced sideways at him quickly, and he lifted one shoulder in a half-hearted shrug, apparently just as confused as she was. Minerva cleared her throat, looking most severe, and reached into a drawer, taking out a copy of what appeared to be the morning's edition of the Daily Prophet. Without a word, she dropped the paper onto the desk, spinning it around for them to read. Hermione and Draco leaned in at the same time to peer at the front page, and Hermione gasped when she spotted the headline. "Death Eater sympathizing Golden Girl resorts to violence," paired with a photograph of Draco and herself embracing outside of the hogshead with Pansy, Knot, and Zabini laughing in the background. "I'd like you to please read that article aloud for us, Mr. Malfoy," Minerva said, her nostrils flaring slightly. Draco tentatively picked up the Prophet, biting his lip, and glanced back up at her at once, only to have her gesture towards it impatiently, before clearing his throat and beginning to read. "This past Saturday marked the grand opening of the Hogsmeade branch of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, once co-owned by George Weasley and his late brother Fred, now by their shared brother Ronald Weasley, Order of Merlin, First Class, the best friend to Harry Potter, the boy who lived, defeater of Lord Voldemort, Order of Merlin, First Class. Is it really necessary to list all of his accomplishments in every article? Mr. Malfoy!" Yes, fine. It was meant to be a day worthy of commemoration for the Weasley brothers. The entire Weasley family, in fact, many of whom are widely celebrated for their accomplishments. Oh, please. But their happiness was heartlessly taken away from them by, as per usual, the Golden Girl, Hermione Granger, Order of Merlin, First Class. When Ronald Weasley stepped out momentarily to collect lunch for his brother and their staff at the Hogshead Inn, it was by a cruel twist of fate that he wound up running into his ex-girlfriend, Granger, and her latest companions, all of whom are known for their troublesome pasts. Draco clenched his jaw, rubbing the side of his face. He sniffed irritably before continuing. As it turns out, while we, the public, were wondering just what the Golden Girl had been up to since returning to Britain, she was skulking around Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where she now teaches Transfiguration, with known Death Eater Draco Malfoy, whose father Lucius Malfoy was released from Azkaban prison just last year after serving time for his crimes against the wizarding world as a member of Lord Voldemort's inner circle. According to one student, who wishes to remain anonymous, Granger and Malfoy have been spotted in less than favorable positions throughout the castle corridors after hours." He trailed off, looking paler than normal, and Minerva had to wave a hand in front of his face in order to drag him back to the present. Though we knew that Granger's new beau was someone disliked by Harry Potter, none of us could have guessed she would go this far in her hunt for fame and fortune. Apparently even Death Eaters with a hatred toward muggle-born witches like herself cannot stop her when they've got a Gringotts account filled with gold attached to their name. Hermione sank low into her seat, hiding her face in her hands. This was not good. No, this was very, very bad. It might even be Gilderoy Lockhart accidentally erasing his own memories bad. While supposedly in Hogsmeade Village as supervisors for the visiting students at Hogwarts, Granger and Malfoy were day-drinking in the Hogshead Inn with Theodore Nott, son of a Death Eater, Thoros Nott, who is currently imprisoned in Azkaban, and his wife Pansy Nott née Parkinson, along with Blaise Zabini, whose mother is none other than the elusive Elora Zabini, famous for the mysterious deaths of her 7 wealthy husbands, someone Granger surely looks up to. When poor Ronald Weasley entered the dingy pub, owned by the brother of the late Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin First Class, Aberforth, it was to find himself the victim of Granger's cold words and hard fists. After shouting at Weasley before all who were present, blaming him for the nasty end to their relationship, Granger ruthlessly attacked him a la Muggle. Unfortunately for Weasley, a broken nose was not enough to satisfy the insatiable witch, who then called upon her Death Eater lapdog to finish the job. Weasley was left broken and bloodied on the pub floor with slugs coming out of his ears. "Slugs, Draco!" I was feeling nostalgic. "I should have retired with Filius," Minerva muttered in distress. Will this be the final straw for Potter? Now that his closest friends have been brutally attacked by their shared ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, will he at last see Granger for who she truly is? How was Granger able to coerce Malfoy into a relationship? It seems that even we have underestimated the means with which the Golden Girl will achieve her ends. Draco carefully set the prophet down on the desk before leaning back and folding his hands in his lap. Both he and Hermione sat silently, their heads bowed, waiting for Minerva to reprimand them. She shouted for 15 minutes straight before losing her breath and collapsing back onto her high-backed chair to remove her spectacles and pinch the bridge of her nose in blatant disapproval. "I must say," said a too-calm voice from behind her, causing all 3 of them to glance up at the portrait of Albus Dumbledore, "this was not something I ever expected happening." Draco shifted in his seat uncomfortably, his face going from simply extra pale to almost gray. "Nor did I," said the portrait of Severus Snape, looking alarmingly amused. "I'm sure your father will have plenty to say about this, Draco." Draco let out what sounded oddly like a whine, and Hermione hid her face in her hands again, mortified. "Neither of you will be supervising a Hogsmeade troop again," said Minerva, giving them a sharp look. "I may not be able to give you detention any more, but if this behavior continues, I am more than willing to get creative." "Yes, Professor." She nodded, pursing her lips, and then said, "If you would both now head down to Hermione's office, you'll find Mr. Potter there waiting to question you on behalf of the Aura Department." Yes, Gilderoy Lockhart bad indeed. "Well, shite," Draco announced loudly the moment he and Hermione exited the headmistress' office. "If Potter doesn't arrest me, my parents will most likely sneak into the castle and kill me in my sleep." "I think I'm going to be sick," said Hermione weakly, clutching her stomach. "Keep it in, Granger," said Draco, taking her by the hand and forcing her down the corridor while she dragged her feet. "We've got to go get yelled at by someone else now. What do you reckon the odds are he socks me in the face? Because, you see, I happen to like the way I look." Hermione was not listening. All she could think about was the fact that he was touching her. She wasn't sure if she should act as though nothing happened between them, or perhaps say something about it, though she had no idea as to what. She did realize, however, as they walked, that Veronica and Luna were not entirely mental for thinking they might be together. The only other person she had this sort of comfort with, the kind where you could happily rest your head on their lap without any implications, was Harry. And that was a very, very different sort of relationship. Somehow, at the same time, Hermione was relieved to see Draco acting so comfortable around her. The morning after her first time with Ron had been awkward at best, full of little to no eye contact, flushed faces, and Harry eyeing them with an expression of mingled amusement and disgust. Draco, on the other hand, was acting perfectly normal, or at least in that strange normal that they'd acquired since meeting again in August. Oh, but Harry, she thought miserably, he's going to see right through us. They'd never been around him before, together, or not for very long, at least. Perhaps once upon a time, Harry wouldn't have noticed such a thing, she and Draco's strange comfort with one another. He'd spent much of his childhood wrapped up in his thoughts, had been known to be rather oblivious at times. But the Harry that awaited them in her office now had been through aura training, where he learned interrogation techniques and how to read a person's body language to tell whether or not they were lying. He'd spent years in the field at this point, was now in line to become the next head of the aura department, and the slight flush on Hermione's face, brought on by Draco's hand holding her own, had his entire body tensing the moment they entered the room. Thankfully, Draco dropped her hand with a sort of casual grace so that she would not be forced to awkwardly detach herself from him, which would surely make her even more flustered. "Slugs, Malfoy, really," Harry said at once, looking unimpressed. He turned his gaze on Hermione when Draco only shrugged, unapologetic. "Did you really give permission for him to hex Ron?" Hermione heaved a great sigh and dropped into one of the chairs opposite her desk, behind which Harry sat, reminding her precisely who was in charge at that moment. She eventually nodded her head, choosing to stay silent as to not further criminalize herself. There really was no point in lying about that part. Ron would have already told him. "She made me promise not to cause any lasting damage," said Draco, dropping into the seat beside her. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression one of pure, and completely false, boredom. "Right, get on with it, Potter." Harry's eyes darted between them for a minute, and they both sat silently, waiting for him to either start shouting or draw his wand. The longer he did neither, the more tense Hermione became. Then, suddenly, he barked out a loud laugh that made Draco flinch and Hermione blink in surprise. "Skeeter's work gets more and more far-fetched every year. You two, shagging?" Harry scoffed, apparently marveling in the ridiculousness of such a thing. "I'd sooner hear she and Pansy Parkinson were braiding each other's hair." Draco snorted, loudly. Harry's amusement vanished almost immediately. He looked from Draco's poorly concealed smirk to Hermione's pink face, which may as well have had the word guilty written on it, honestly, and then back again with narrowed eyes, all color draining from his face as realization dawned on him. "Please, no," he croaked. "Well, Potter," said Draco wryly, "I can confirm that she has indeed braided Pansy's hair, or at least attempted to," he amended. "She did a pretty shoddy job, in my opinion." Hermione immediately elbowed him in the gut, and he winced, glaring at her as she gave Harry a tight-lipped smile. "Don't listen to him," she said. "He was dropped on his head as an infant." Draco scoffed, placing a hand over his heart as though fatally wounded. "I'll have you know that Dobby only dropped me once, and I bounced." "Hermione," Harry's voice cracked, and she winced. "Please tell me you didn't actually shag Malfoy." He looked so desperate it was almost sad. Hermione opened her mouth to answer, though she hadn't the slightest idea what she was going to say, when the door swung open and Neville slumped inside, looking tired and a little sweaty, but smiling nonetheless. "Hiya, Harry," he said warmly, crossing over to where the three of them sat. "I heard you were here. I would have come sooner, but I was cleaning up in the greenhouse too." He sat himself on the edge of Hermione's desk, slumping forward in exhaustion. "I think some sort of animal from the Forbidden Forest broke into it last night. The place was a right mess. I just spent the last hour reporting everything." Hermione let out a small squeak, and Harry's eyes immediately narrowed, then widened in horror. He shook his head profusely, clenching his jaw tight. "You all right, Harry?" asked Neville, bemused. "Nope," said Harry gruffly. "I am not all right, Neville." He glanced at Draco, then again at Hermione. "In fact, I think my breakfast is about to make a reappearance. If you'll please excuse me." He inclined his head towards Neville in farewell and started for the door. Pausing with his hand on the doorknob, he looked back at Hermione one last time. "I'll just file a report saying you were both provoked and Malfoy was just—" he cleared his throat uncomfortably— "defending your honor. Ron'll be fine." He hurried out the door before anyone could say anything else. Hermione rounded on Draco as it clicked shut behind him. "I thought you said you were going to call for a house elf," she whispered fiercely. "What the hell happened?" He winced, "forgot." She threw her hands up in exasperation. Neville cleared his throat awkwardly. "I feel like I'm missing something here." "You're missing several somethings, Longbottom," said Draco plainly, "but I wouldn't worry your pretty little head about it." "Oh, God," groaned Hermione, tilting her head back to rest on the back of her chair. Several awful things were happening in her stomach at the moment, and she thought, if she had eaten, her breakfast too would have threatened to make a reappearance. She turned her head to face Draco. I have to go after him, don't I? What should I do? Deny? Draco eyed her for a moment. His lips pursed slightly in thought. Then he, most unhelpfully, she thought, shrugged. That's your decision to make, he said plainly. Hermione huffed and got to her feet. She caught up with Harry just as he was passing the doors to the hospital wing. He twisted around at the sound of her calling his name and gave her a grimace. She stopped, sighing and rubbing her temples. Her face was a fierce shade of Weasley red, she knew. I don't actually have a clue as to what I'm supposed to say to you right now. Do I apologize? She quickly shook her head. No, because I'm a grown woman and can sleep with whomever I please. Defend my decisions? You probably don't want to hear my reasoning anyway. Did you actually, and I need you to be completely honest here, shag Malfoy in a greenhouse last night? Harry looked as though he were in physical pain and briefly shut his eyes, as though fighting a migraine. When she gave a reluctant nod, What were you thinking, Hermione? Hermione gestured uselessly. I don't know. I was drunk. He was there, she said frantically. And he really is handsome, Harry. I doubt even you could deny that. Just stop. He held up a hand, frowning. How drunk were you? Did he take advantage? Don't you dare finish that sentence, Harry James Potter. How dare you accuse him of that? Her hands were on her hips now. I know you don't like him, but really, the consent may not have been verbal, but from what I remember, it was very enthusiastic. I didn't need to know that. I mean, yeah, but not that particular wording. That was unnecessary. I'm going to have nightmares again. Did you know they stopped when James was born? If they come back now, I'm sending you the bill for my dreamless sleep prescription. Hermione rolled her eyes before crossing her arms and looking at him very seriously. Are you mad at me? Harry let out a long sigh, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. No, of course not, Hermione, he said. It's your life, you can do what you want. But you know I worry. Malfoy? No, I can't. Ginny's going to have an aneurysm when I tell her. His eyes widened fearfully. Ron is... Oh no, don't you even suggest telling him. Do you wish me dead? I thought you loved me, Harry. This isn't time for sarcasm, he blinked. I can't believe I just said that. Bloody hell, you're going to send me to an early grave at this point. Hermione's hands fell to her sides and she looked at him beseechingly. Can you please keep this between us for the time being? Or perhaps for all eternity? You can tell Ginny, but the two of you... Yes, yeah, of course. I don't think anyone would believe me regardless. Honestly, Hermione, I'd be shocked if anyone takes that article seriously. He sighed again, rubbing his eyes under his glasses. Can I request a few days to be grumpy about this? How many days are we talking? Harry narrowed his eyes and thought. 5 to 8 business days. 3 to 5. 5 to 6. Fine. I'll meet when you're done and we can grab lunch or something. Bring James and Albus. I still haven't seen them since I got back. Yeah, all right. I'll get Ginny to arrange it. I'm not going to give you a hug goodbye, and we will definitely be discussing this at a later date. Understood, said Hermione, nodding. Bye, Harry. She waited until he had descended the marble staircase and disappeared into the entrance hall, before running her fingers through her hair, drawing a deep breath and turning back towards her office. Neville had left, and Draco had his back to her, still seated before her desk when she entered. He was studying his cuticles with incredible interest, and didn't bother looking up when she resumed her seat at his side. So, did Potter buy it? He asked after a moment. Hermione pursed her lips in irritation at his cool drawl. He's taking 5 to 6 business days to grieve over my lack of propriety before resuming his place as my best friend. At that, Draco glanced up, his mouth hanging partly open. 5 to 6 business days, he repeated in something akin to disbelief. She confirmed with a small nod, lips still pursed. He tilted his head to the side, narrowing his eyes slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. You didn't lie, he said at last, as though he couldn't quite believe it. How come? Hermione gave a jerky shrug, turning her gaze to her lap, where she was wringing her hands. Biting her lip, she said quietly, Lying about it would make it seem like something I regret. And it isn't? No, she said even quieter. Huh. She snapped her head up to glare at him. Huh? That's all you have to say? That's not even a word. The corner of Draco's lips lifted slightly. I suppose I'm just surprised. I assumed you would, he said. "You seemed awfully embarrassed when Porter started putting two and two together." Hermione crossed her arms. "I just don't appreciate other people having knowledge about my sex life," she said hotly. Draco smiled grimly and was quiet for a while before nodding his head, as though coming to a conclusion. He stood, stretched a bit, and then offered her a hand, smirking. "Let's order breakfast from that house elf obsessed with my ancestry and open all of our inevitable hate mail together." Another bigot. Hermione tossed the letter into one of the 3 piles that lay on the breakfast table in her living quarters and took a sip of her coffee. "Apparently, I'm tainting the Malfoy family name." By the time she and Draco had settled down to eat the wide variety of breakfast items Creature had gleefully laid out for them, there were at least 12 owls fighting each other to get through the only open window in the room. More came shortly after. They were currently sorting them into 3 piles: blatant bigotry, horrified ex-fans, disintegrated howlers. "Oh, this one is from..." Draco paused, frowning, then tossed it in the horrified ex-fans pile. "Don't read that." "I think this one's from Veronica's mother," said Hermione, quickly scanning the letter. "Apparently, it is my fault she's avoiding any and all betrothal opportunities. I'm setting a poor example for her impressionable young daughter. Which pile?" "I've met Mrs. Smith," said Draco, very matter-of-factly, as he refilled his cup of tea. "Blatant bigotry, without a doubt. The Smiths simply tend to be more subtle about it." Hermione tossed the letter aside before readjusting the glove on her right hand. She had learned from her first scandal in her 4th year to avoid contact with the skin when opening the post, and picked up a small parcel. Inside was a crimson potion, which, according to the note attached, was a monthly contraceptive. "How thoughtful," she muttered darkly, creating a new pile as she set it aside. She noticed Draco eyeing it, slowly going a shade paler. "Don't worry, I'm on a Muggle contraceptive." He let out a breath of relief and picked up a new letter, wincing at the name. He stared at the envelope for a long time without opening it. "You all right over there?" she asked, crumpling up a note that held a slur and nothing else. She frowned when he didn't respond. "Draco?" "It's from my mother." "Oh," she swallowed. "Shit." "Yeah." Draco inhaled sharply, straightened up, and carefully opened the envelope. He read in silence, his jaw clenched tightly, and when he finished, he set it down as though it were highly explosive and needed to be treated with extreme care. "Well, I certainly can't say I'm surprised. At least my father hasn't sent anything." "Actually, I believe one of those howlers was from him," said Hermione, eyeing the pile of ash between the pumpkin juice and crumpets with disdain. "I set it aflame before it could start." "That's probably for the best." She nodded grimly, but her curiosity got the best of her, and she could not keep herself from asking, "What did Narcissa say?" He crumpled up the letter and tossed it into the blatant bigotry pile in response. "Oh well," she murmured, tearing off a piece of croissant with her ungloved hand. "Disappointing, but certainly not surprising." "I'm not going to respond to her," said Draco defiantly. "She should know better by now. They both should." Hermione shrugged. This was not a discussion she felt like having, nor did she believe it to be any of her business. The Malfoys' belief system had led to more than one unsavory memory for her, and it wasn't something she enjoyed pondering at length. The door to her quarters suddenly swung open, and Veronica skipped in, grinning. "How did the meeting with Minnie—" She came to an abrupt stop at the sight of the breakfast table. "You two make me awfully glad I'm not famous." "Heavy is the head that wears the crown." Hermione paused to sip her coffee. "Your mother wrote, by the way. She says I'm a poor influence on you." "Funny that someone could ever say that about a person who was head girl awarded an Order of Merlin for helping to defeat a dark wizard," said Veronica casually, as she moved to join them at the table and fixed herself a plate, "and rose to the head of the Beast Division in the Department for Control and Regulation of Magical Creatures within 3 years at the Ministry." "I so dearly love that my entire life is public knowledge. Apart from the last 2 years, that is, for which I am eternally grateful." "You still haven't given me the details on that Malcolm Adler bloke," said Veronica primly, pouring herself a cup of tea. She shot Hermione a pointed look. "I hope you're not under the impression I'm going to forget about how uncomfortable you get whenever someone mentions his name." Hermione took another bite of croissant to avoid speaking. Both Veronica and Draco narrowed their eyes at her. "He does seem rather impressive," said the latter tentatively, watching her closely. That discovery on one of the 5 exceptions to Gamp's law was groundbreaking, to say the least. She avoided eye contact, flushing slightly. Granger? Mm-hmm. Say it. Say what? Whatever it is that you're holding back. Hermione sighed, making a split-second decision. We made that discovery together, she said softly, meeting his gaze. I just couldn't put my name on it, or it wouldn't have gotten the recognition it deserved, considering what my name meant at the time. What it still means, she added, biting her lip. Draco frowned. Oh, said Veronica, sounding disappointed. I thought you just slept with him. Hermione propped her elbow up on the table and dropped her head into her hands, hiding her face behind a curtain of hair. Veronica made a sound of triumph. I knew it! At that moment, Hermione wished she had something to duck behind. Veronica, if you have nothing of importance to say, kindly fuck off, said Draco suddenly, adapting the same cool drawl he'd used earlier that morning. Granger's sex life is, frankly, none of your or anyone else's business. Hermione heard Veronica scoff, but after a moment of silence, there was a barely coherent apology, followed by retreating footsteps and a door closing shut. She peered up at Draco, who was opening yet another letter as though nothing had happened. Thank you. He shrugged, not looking up. It's the truth. Hermione pursed her lips, and she opened the next letter, trying not to smile too widely.